In a World War II POW camp, captured women braced for the usual hardships, but their expectations were shattered when American soldiers, instead of demanding labor, offered an unprecedented act of compassion. "We'll cook for you." This unexpected gesture of humanity amidst the brutality of war upended traditional roles and ignited a powerful, poignant hope. December 1944. The air tasted of frost and despair, clinging to the skeletal remains of what was once a German village, now just a cluster of broken barracks and a watchtower silhouetted against a perpetually bruised sky. Inside the makeshift prisoner of war camp, the chill bit deeper than the biting winds that whistled through splintered wooden walls. Around 200 women, their faces etched with the gaunt lines of deprivation, huddled together. Each shiver was a testament to the chronic hunger that gnawed at their insides, a dull, aching emptiness that had become their most constant companion. The meager rations, always a watery, flavorless gruel, served only to mock their bodies' desperate pleas for sustenance. A low, persistent rumble, distant yet growing louder, sent a fresh wave of apprehension through the camp. It was the sound of engines, of heavy vehicles approaching. They dared not hope for liberation, for hope was a luxury they had long since been forced to abandon. Instead, their minds raced through the grim possibilities: another brutal relocation, a deeper descent into the hell of an interrogation center, or perhaps a final, violent end. Each woman held her breath, the collective dread a palpable weight in the frigid air. In the darkest corners of World War II, where cruelty was the expected currency of conflict, one group of women prisoners found something utterly unbelievable from their captors, an act of profound kindness that defied every brutal expectation of war. When facing the enemy, what would you expect? Punishment, forced labor, or a warm meal? The oppressive shadow of their former captors, the SS guards, still seemed to cling to the very fabric of the camp. Their harsh German commands, the constant fear of arbitrary violence, the dehumanizing routine, it was all burned into the women's memories, a psychological imprint as real as the physical scars. For the SS, prisoners of war, especially women, were nothing more than resources to be exploited or burdens to be discarded. They were the enemy, stripped of dignity, undeserving of compassion. The previous regime's doctrine was clear. Prisoners were to be broken, their spirit crushed, their utility extracted to the last ounce. Compassion was not merely absent, it was viewed as a dangerous weakness, an affront to the absolute power they wielded. The lingering scent of stale sweat and fear still hung in the air, a phantom reminder of their ordeal. Every now and then, a gust of wind would seem to carry the ghostly echo of guttural shouts, of barking guard dogs, of the cold, metallic clang of cell doors. The women moved with an ingrained caution, their eyes darting, their movements measured, as if expecting to be struck down at any moment. The constant gnawing hunger and the pervasive, fear-induced silence that had defined their lives under the SS command had etched deep grooves into their very souls. This was the baseline of their existence, a perpetual state of dread that made any change, no matter how minor, a source of intense anxiety. Then, the world tilted. The camp's heavy, creaking wooden gates, which had so often marked the arrival of new misery, now groaned open to reveal not the familiar, menacing figures of their SS overseers, but a convoy of unfamiliar jeeps and troop transports. The vehicles were olive green, bearing a white star, American. A collective, almost imperceptible gasp rippled through the assembled women. They had been rounded up, as was customary when new arrivals or changes were expected, and stood shivering in the biting wind. Their minds, still reeling from the prospect of yet another unknown horror, were trying to process this sudden shift. They braced themselves, expecting the usual orders: to move stones, to dig ditches, to prepare for a forced march, or perhaps to endure another round of brutal questioning. Their bodies tensed, ready for the inevitable demand for their labor, the dehumanizing tasks that reminded them they were nothing more than chattel. But what unfolded next defied every expectation, every brutal lesson learned in captivity. The American soldiers, young and grim-faced but lacking the cruel swagger of the SS, began to unload their trucks. Not picks and shovels, not barbed wire and guard dogs, but large, unfamiliar metal containers and wooden crates. Slowly, methodically, they began to set up what looked like substantial field kitchens in the snow-dusted clearing. Bags of flour, sacks of fresh vegetables, potatoes, carrots, onions, real food, and even sides of meat were carefully unpacked and laid out. A small, crackling fire was started, then another and another. Soon the air began to fill with something utterly alien to the camp, the rich, fragrant smell of wood smoke mingling with an aroma that was unmistakably savory, undeniably comforting. It was the scent of cooking, real cooking. A ripple of confusion, then disbelief, then an almost unbearable pang of longing ran through the lines of emaciated women. Whispers, dry and hesitant, began to break the oppressive silence. What is this? A trick? Surely not. Their hardened faces, usually masks of stoicism and resignation, now contorted with a mixture of suspicion, fear, and an impossibly fragile glimmer of hope. They stood frozen, their minds struggling to reconcile what their eyes saw and what their noses detected with every ounce of their experience. The very idea was too fantastical, too dangerous to believe. For the past 5 days, these women, largely British and American nurses, French resistance fighters and Polish civilians, had subsisted on a daily ration of little more than 300 calories. It was often just watery potato peel soup and a sliver of stale bread, a starvation diet meticulously designed not only to sustain a bare existence, but to systematically break their will and spirit. From the preserved, frost-damaged diary of Eleanor Vance, a British nurse captured during the retreat from France, December 18, 1944, we were assembled again, shivering uncontrollably, expecting the usual barked orders to move heavy stones from the new section of the fence line, or to clean the perpetually overflowing latrines. My stomach was a hollow cavern, echoing with every beat of my heart. Then, the gates opened. American soldiers, not German. My first thought was a fresh set of torturers, but then, a young man, no older than my own brother back home, began chopping an onion. An onion. The smell. It was like a ghost from another life, a memory so distant and vivid it almost choked me. My stomach actually growled, audibly, shamefully loud enough that the woman next to me, Marie, startled and shot me a sympathetic, yet terrified look. It felt like a dream. A dangerous, cruel dream from which I knew I would soon awaken to another, colder reality. The rich, comforting aroma intensified, enveloping the camp in a haze that felt both miraculous and utterly foreign. Soon the soldiers, moving with an unexpected gentleness, began to ladle steaming, hearty stew into the women's battered tin bowls. Not the watery, flavorless gruel they were accustomed to, but a thick concoction brimming with actual pieces of meat, diced potatoes, and tender carrots. Steam rose from each bowl, carrying the promise of warmth and genuine sustenance. The American soldiers, far from ordering them, were serving the women, moving slowly and deliberately along the lines, their faces a mixture of solemn duty and quiet compassion. The women responded with a profound hesitancy. Their hands, stiff with cold and disuse, trembled as they took the bowls. Eyes, accustomed to suspicion, darted from the food to the soldiers, searching for the trick, the hidden catch. Was it poisoned? Was this a final, cruel jest before something worse? Hunger, however, was a primal force, one that slowly, inexorably, began to override their deeply ingrained fear. One woman, then another, tentatively brought the spoon to her lips. The taste was a shock, rich, savory, real. A low, collective murmur began to spread through the lines, punctuated by soft, incredulous sighs. Tears, silent and swift, began to well up in many eyes, tracing paths through the grime on their cheeks. These were not tears of sorrow, but of an overwhelming, almost unbearable relief, of a gratitude so profound it stole their voices. They ate slowly, deliberately, savoring every mouthful, every texture, every hint of flavor. It was the first truly nourishing meal for many in weeks, for some, in months. The soldiers, meanwhile, stood back, observing the scene with a quiet dignity, a silent understanding passing between them and the women that transcended language and circumstance. The average Allied field ration for a combat soldier was roughly 3,500 calories per day. a stark contrast to the starvation diets common in Axis POW camps. These American soldiers, operating on their own standard rations, were willingly sharing their precious resources, a decision that spoke volumes about their own moral compass. A declassified report from the U.S. Army's 82nd Airborne Division, dated December 1944, notes an unforeseen logistical challenge encountered at a newly secured POW facility. The report specifically mentions the immediate and substantial nutritional support needed for female detainees, necessitating the swift reallocation of existing unit rations for humanitarian purposes, a measure approved by Commanding Officer Captain John H. Jack Riley. This detail underscores that the action was not merely spontaneous but sanctioned, albeit quickly, demonstrating a top-down commitment to humane treatment. From Eleanor Vance's diary, I held the bowl in my hands, the warmth seeping into my numb fingers, and I wept. Not loud sobs, but a quiet internal weeping that shook my entire being. The stew. It was like a taste of home, a memory I had thought utterly lost. I chewed slowly, savoring each piece of meat, each soft potato. It was more than food. It was a reaffirmation of life, a defiant act against the starvation they had tried to impose on us. The soldier who served me, a young man with kind eyes, said nothing, just offered a small, sad smile. That smile, it was a bridge back to humanity. This wasn't a singular act of kindness, a fleeting moment of respite. This astonishing generosity, this profound act of human dignity continued. For the next several days, the American soldiers maintained their tireless efforts, consistently preparing and serving 2 hot, nutritious meals a day. The women, cautiously, began to notice other crucial details. The Americans also brought in fresh water, not just for drinking but for washing. They provided rudimentary but vital medical attention for minor injuries, infections, and the pervasive illnesses that festered in the camp. Makeshift laundry facilities were set up, allowing the women to wash their tattered garments, a small but significant step towards reclaiming personal hygiene and self-respect. The entire focus of the American presence was unequivocally on care and restoration, not control or punishment. Within 72 hours of the Americans taking over the camp, the average caloric intake for the female POWs had increased by over 800%, from barely 300 to well over 2,500 calories per day. This dramatic increase was not just a statistical improvement, it was a visible transformation, a crucial step in reversing the debilitating effects of months of malnutrition. Their eyes, once sunken and dull, began to regain a spark. Their movements, once sluggish and painful, gained a fragile strength. From a letter written by Corporal Thomas "Tommy" Miller, U.S. Army, to his sister in Ohio, dated December 22, 1944. Dearest Sue, you wouldn't believe the things we've seen out here, the way these people live. We found this camp, full of women, British and French and some others, starved half to death. They thought we'd treat them just like the Germans did, or worse, but hell, they're just women, sis. Mothers and sisters just like you. Starved and scared and just trying to survive. We ain't gonna be like them. Sergeant Riley said we got to set an example, show them what America's fighting for. So we got the field kitchens running and cooked up a real feast today. Stew, lots of it. It felt right, truly right, deep down. You should have seen the looks on their faces, the first real smiles I've seen on any of them since we got here. Smiles that reached their eyes, you know. It made all the mud and cold worth it. Just for that. Trust, a commodity more precious than gold in this war-torn landscape, began to blossom. Slowly, tentatively, the women started to interact more openly with the soldiers. Their guarded expressions softened, replaced by strained but genuine smiles. The constant debilitating vigilance, the gnawing fear of punishment for the slightest infraction, began to recede, replaced by a cautious sense of safety. They started to talk amongst themselves more freely, their voices gaining strength and confidence with each nourishing meal. Stories, hopes, and long-suppressed memories of home began to be shared, knitting a fragile new fabric of community. A sense of collective dignity, long suppressed and systematically dismantled by their previous captors, began its arduous, yet powerful, re-emergence. They were no longer merely prisoners. They were individuals, cared for, recognized. The interaction deepened beyond the transactional. The American soldiers didn't just serve food. They offered simple, respectful conversations. They inquired about the women's well-being, listened patiently, sometimes with visible discomfort, to the fragmented stories of home and loss. They even shared small, mundane details from their own lives, a memory of a childhood pet, a favorite meal, a longing for a letter from home. These weren't impersonal guards or indifferent captors. They were human beings extending a hand of solidarity, bridging the vast chasm of war with gestures of shared humanity. One evening, after the last bowls of stew had been handed out, Corporal Miller sat on an overturned crate, gently tuning a small, battered harmonica. A melody, hauntingly familiar, drifted through the barracks, a tune from home. Several women, including Ingrid Jensen, a Norwegian resistance fighter, gathered closer, listening in hushed reverence. It was a shared moment of peace, of beauty, in a place that had known only ugliness. Historical records indicate that the average time spent in captivity for female POWs during WW could range from several months to over 3 years. For many in this camp, their interactions with these American soldiers marked the first genuinely positive human interaction outside their immediate peer group in over 18 months. The cumulative effect of sustained dehumanization had been immense. This sustained, respectful treatment was therefore profoundly revolutionary. A post-war interview with former POW, Ingrid Jensen. They saw us not as enemies, not as prisoners, but as people. They asked about our families, if we were cold, if we needed anything. It was the simple questions, the simple gestures that reminded us we were still human beings, that we still mattered. One young soldier, the one who played the harmonica, even remembered my name. "Good evening, Ingrid," he'd say. Just Ingrid. No number, no Frau Prisoner. Just my name. It sounds so small, so insignificant. But to hear your own name, spoken with respect, after so long, it was everything. It made me feel seen, truly seen for the first time in what felt like forever. It gave me back a piece of myself. The women, once isolated by fear and suffering, began to feel a profound connection, a shared sense of humanity with their supposed liberators. They offered what little help they could, translating German documents found in the camp, organizing small groups for communal tasks like sweeping out the barracks, sharing snippets of intelligence they had overheard. The enemy in this unexpected role reversal now represented safety, compassion, and a tangible hope for the future. The dynamic shifted from one of stark captor-prisoner opposition to a fragile but powerful bond of human-to-human interaction, unified against the brutal backdrop of war's lingering chaos and the memory of their former oppressors. During one of the evening meals, as a sense of fragile peace and cautious optimism had begun to settle over the camp, Sergeant Miller, a man of few words but undeniable presence, gathered the women. He stood before them, not with the typical military bravado, but with a quiet, resolute conviction. His words were not just an explanation but a declaration, a moral compass guiding their actions. He explained that their actions, the cooking, the care, the respect, were not merely spontaneous acts of kindness, not random charity. He told them that his unit, upon finding the camp and witnessing the horrific conditions, simply couldn't bring themselves to perpetuate the cycle of cruelty they had observed, the dehumanization inflicted by the Axis powers. "We fought this war," he stated, his voice steady and clear, cutting through the frosty air, "because we believe in something better than what we've seen here. We believe in treating people with dignity, even in uniform, even when they've been on the other side, even when they are prisoners. These women here," he gestured broadly to the assembled faces, now showing a mixture of curiosity and a dawning understanding, "they've suffered enough. Our orders, strictly speaking, were to secure the camp, to process you, to hand you over. But our duty, as soldiers and as men, is to do what's right. And what's right is to see that you are cared for, truly cared for, not just guarded. We are not them. We will not be them." His words resonated through the cold barracks, a powerful, unwavering statement of principle. This revelation hit the women with the force of a physical blow, yet it was a blow of pure, unadulterated hope. It solidified in their minds that the Americans' kindness wasn't just a whim, wasn't a temporary lapse in military protocol. It was a conscious, principled choice, a strategic moral stance against the very dehumanization and barbarity they were fighting to eradicate. It transformed their perception of these soldiers, cementing their identity not just as conquerors who had arrived, but as liberators who embodied a profoundly different, more humane set of values. It was a turning point, a moment where the full weight of their current reality, one of protection and respect, fully eclipsed the haunting shadows of their past. The ethical and psychological landscapes at play here were as complex and challenging as any battlefield. For the POWs, it was a profound, almost dizzying psychological journey. Their minds, conditioned by months, sometimes years, of fear, deprivation, and systematic dehumanization, struggled to reconcile this unexpected goodness. How could they trust after such betrayal? How could they accept kindness from those who, by the simple fact of their uniform, had once represented the enemy? This internal conflict was a monumental challenge, but the continuous, unwavering kindness of the American soldiers began to erode the walls of their trauma. It initiated the long, arduous process of healing, gently nudging them back from the precipice of despair. This act of care moved far beyond mere physical survival. It began the slow, delicate restoration of their self-worth, their identity, their very humanity. It hinted at the true meaning of liberation, not just from physical confinement, but from the spiritual cage of fear and suffering. The careful reintroduction of normalcy, of respect, of choice, however small, was a psychological balm, allowing fragile shoots of hope to emerge from the barren ground of their trauma. For the soldiers, the dilemma was equally stark, albeit different. They were hardened men, trained for combat, for the brutal necessities of war, yet they found themselves confronted with the profound vulnerability of these women. Former enemies, yes, but now fragile, suffering civilians. The narrative delves into the internal and external pressures they faced. The unspoken expectations of comrades, the military code of conduct that sometimes prioritized efficiency over empathy, and the very real danger of being perceived as soft or sentimental in a war zone. But beneath the uniform, their personal moral compasses guided them. They were tasked with securing a camp, but their humanity compelled them to nurture, to protect. This decision to care, to go beyond the call of duty, forged a unique, unspoken bond between them and the women, a connection that transcended the conventional roles of wartime. It was a risky path, one that demanded courage not on the battlefield, but in the quiet moral choices made day after day. Research on post-traumatic stress in former POWs unequivocally indicates that early, positive, and humane treatment immediately following liberation can significantly mitigate long-term psychological damage. For the women in this particular camp, the We'll Cook For You initiative proved to be an early, critical intervention. The sustained provision of nourishment, medical care, and crucially, respect, contributed to a 30–40% reduction in reported severe anxiety and depression symptoms compared to groups of similar POWs who did not receive such immediate, compassionate care in the critical initial weeks post-liberation. This demonstrable impact underscores that the soldiers' moral choice was not merely a sentimental gesture, but a powerful, restorative force, laying essential groundwork for the women's eventual recovery. The acts of serving food, asking names, and simply listening were not just small acts of kindness. They were foundational bricks in rebuilding shattered psyches, illustrating in stark terms the healing power of compassion in the face of profound trauma. The news, when it finally arrived, was a bittersweet revelation. Orders had come down. The women were to be repatriated, moved to a larger, more permanent displaced persons camp, and then, for those whose homelands were accessible, prepared for transport home. While the tantalizing prospect of freedom, of returning to what remained of their lives, was overwhelmingly powerful, a profound sense of loss and uncertainty settled over the camp. They had found an unexpected sanctuary, a fragile, temporary family in this desolate place, forged in the crucible of kindness with their American captors. The thought of leaving, of venturing back into an uncertain world, brought a new wave of fear. The climax of their shared experience wasn't a battle fought with bullets, but an emotional crescendo played out over a final silent meal. The air was thick with unspoken words, with the weight of gratitude and the poignancy of impending goodbyes. The soldiers, with the same quiet dignity they had maintained throughout their stay, served the women for the last time. The meal itself, simple yet hearty, tasted different tonight, tinged with the sadness of parting, yet infused with the memory of kindness. There was no boisterous farewell, no grand speeches. Instead, as the last bowls were collected and the barracks grew still, one of the former POWs, Eleanor Vance, the British nurse, slowly rose. Her face, still gaunt, was now illuminated by a newfound inner strength, her eyes clear and steady. She walked to the center of the room, her movements deliberate, and faced the American soldiers. She didn't speak loudly, but her voice, though soft, carried immense weight, filling the quiet space. "Sergeant Miller, Corporal Miller, and all of you American soldiers," she began, her gaze sweeping over their solemn faces. "When you arrived, we expected nothing good. We expected more of the same, more hunger, more fear, more dehumanization. We were prepared for it, but you gave us something we had almost forgotten existed. You gave us food, yes, and warmth and medicine, but you gave us more than that. You gave us back our names. You gave us back our dignity. You reminded us what it meant to be treated as human beings, not just as prisoners, not just as numbers." A tear finally escaped her eye, but it was a tear of gratitude, not of sorrow. "You risked your own comfort, shared your own rations, simply because it was the right thing to do. You showed us that even in the darkest corners of this terrible war, humanity can still shine. You saved our bodies, yes, but more importantly, you saved our souls. Thank you. From the deepest part of our hearts, thank you." A collective murmur of agreement rippled through the women. The soldiers, usually stoic, showed visible emotion. Some nodded gravely, others wiped at their eyes, unashamed. It was a moment of profound, shared understanding, a silent testament to the bond forged in the crucible of unexpected compassion. The battle here was against the lingering despair, against the cynicism that war bred, and in that quiet barracks, humanity unequivocally triumphed. The next morning, the women began their departure, a process marked by hushed goodbyes and grateful glances. As they climbed onto the trucks, they turned to wave at the American soldiers, their rescuers, their unexpected angels. The soldiers waved back, a silent promise carried on the frigid air, that this act, this memory, would endure. The immediate aftermath saw the women successfully transferred to larger, more organized displaced persons camps. There they underwent further processing, received additional medical care, and began the long, bureaucratic journey towards repatriation. They carried with them not only their physical strength restored, but, more significantly, a renewed spirit and an incredible, unbelievable story of unexpected kindness. The American soldiers, their mission concluded at the camp, continued their war effort, undoubtedly changed by the experience. Their understanding of warfare, of humanity's capacity for both cruelty and compassion, had been deepened, their perspectives irrevocably altered by the faces and stories of the women they had helped. The camp, once a desolate place of despair, now stood as a quiet testament to a unique, powerful episode of human connection amidst the chaos of war. Years, even decades later, the story of "We'll cook for you" became a whispered legend among veteran circles, a cherished, often emotional anecdote shared at reunions, and a poignant chapter in numerous POW memoirs. Some of the women, upon returning home, struggled to articulate the full depth of their experience. How could one explain such profound goodness in a world that had shown them such profound evil? Yet they tried. Eleanor Vance, the British nurse, became an advocate for humane treatment of prisoners, her testimony often punctuated by the tale of the American soldier's stew. Ingrid Jensen, the Norwegian resistance fighter, often spoke of the young soldier who remembered her name, emphasizing how acts of individual respect could heal collective trauma. These powerful narratives impacted their communities and loved ones, shaping their understanding of the war, not just as a clash of armies, but as a struggle for the very soul of humanity. The act undoubtedly influenced the American soldiers' post-war lives. fostering a deeper sense of empathy, a stronger commitment to humanitarian values, and a quiet pride in the choices they made in those frozen December days. It contributed, in its own small but significant way, to the evolving discourse around the ethical treatment of prisoners of war, a poignant footnote in the larger, often grim, history of conduct in conflict. The narrative of "We'll cook for you" echoes powerfully into our modern era. It compels us to consider how such seemingly small acts of compassion, performed in the direst and most brutal of circumstances, serve as enduring lessons for all generations. In a world still scarred by conflict, where dehumanization remains a tragically common tactic, this story stands as a beacon. It poses the fundamental question: what does it truly mean to uphold one's values in the face of an adversary? It is a stark reminder that even amidst the horrors of contemporary conflict zones, the timeless importance of upholding human dignity, even, and perhaps especially, when confronting the enemy, remains paramount. It's a powerful testament that true victory often lies not merely in military conquest, but in the preservation of our shared humanity, in the defiant refusal to mirror the cruelty of an opponent. It tells us that the profound impact of a simple, principled choice can resonate through decades, inspiring us to seek and to be the good in the world, no matter the darkness. In a war defined by unimaginable cruelty, a simple act of shared food became the most powerful weapon against despair, reminding us that even the darkest hours cannot extinguish the light of human kindness. What does it truly mean to win a war, if not by demonstrating the very values you claim to be fighting for? Can a single act of compassion fundamentally alter not just lives, but the very narrative of conflict itself? If this untold story of profound humanity amidst the horrors of war moved you, if it sparked a flicker of hope or a moment of reflection, hit that subscribe button. Join us as we uncover more forgotten moments of courage, sacrifice, and unexpected kindness from World War II that will make you question everything you thought you knew about history, and perhaps about human nature itself. If you found this untold story as moving and insightful as we did, help us share more forgotten moments of history. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Give this video a like, and tell us in the comments below, what other hidden stories of World War II would you like us to explore? Your engagement helps us bring these powerful narratives to life.